Okay, looks like we are live. So as we're waiting for people to dial in, first, Doug, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. If you've missed it, this is our third one of these, not video. We've done a couple on the podcast where we've done part one and part two. You can go back and the link is embedded here. It's underneath the video just a little bit if you want to go back and listen to those. Sorry, it was coming up back at me. It was feeding back, but we're all up and running. So if you want to submit questions, we're going to try to monitor the YouTube comments as well, but you can send them to the Hayes Post podcast. I've got that right here live on my phone, and I will be watching that. So if you've got some questions, please feel free to submit. We've got a few that came in. We're going to address those a little bit later, but I thought maybe a good way to start, Doug, would just be to talk about what you're currently hearing from businesses in terms of the shutdown and how this is impacting them.
Well, the most of what I have been hearing is that they're eager to not be shut down anymore. There is a strong will from people to try and return to some level of normalcy, whatever that is, and kind of open back up and get going again. I think a combination of financial distress coupled with people are tired of staying at home this much, and they're really yearning to get back to some level of things being normal. And so based on what I read and hear, Governor Kelly has an address this evening at 6:30 where I think she's going to address some of those things in terms of opening back up. So we shall see. But it appears that next week may be much more back to normal than what we have been experiencing.
Well, and I'm sure that's good news for business owners. But at this point, I'm wondering, we've been closed now for what, 5 weeks?
Well,
I guess it depends on when you shut down. But I mean, my first big question would be, even if we go back to normal tomorrow, are some of these businesses going to be able to survive?
And that is the underlying question, is just because we open back up, what will people's reactions be? I mean, will people go to restaurants? Will people go to shop and do those kind of things? And that's what we don't know. And, I think we can be pretty confident that things aren't going to return to pre-pandemic, the way things were then. So I think we're going to be dealing with a slowdown for quite a while. And the sad part is that I'm not sure that some businesses will be able to survive in spite of some of the programs the federal government has put forward, the state has put forward, and even banks and that kind of thing working with people. It's a tough road. As most people on Main Street know, there's not tons of capital that back up these type of businesses. They operate pretty lean and they don't have a lot of excess. So it's still a long road ahead for many, no doubt about that.
Yeah, and that's kind of leading into the big thing I want to talk about first, which is your world, the SBA loans. Ran out of money the first time. It sounds like it's going to run out of money real soon again. For those business owners that are struggling, what options do they have if they can't get to those funds? Well, let's start with how do they access those funds? Because there is money available right now, right?
Last I've not heard that the new funding has run out as of yet. There's two programs primarily: the PPP, which is a payroll protection program, and the EIDL, which is the economic injury disaster loans. The PPP has been administered by local banks. You go to your bank, you apply, you can get a loan for up to 2.5 times your monthly payroll. You don't have to pay it back if you meet certain criteria, which is keeping your payroll going at 75% of your payroll going until I believe it's June 30th, and continue to pay your rent and your utilities and some things like that. So it's basically a forgiven loan. At this point in time, those funds have not run out. I'm sure they will. So and I've had different people give me different opinions of, well, don't get in a rush because it's supposed to be, you can apply anytime up till June the 30th. Well, that's all well and good if there's still funds available. But if you haven't applied and are interested in it, contact your bank and talk to them about it, because I think it's important to get in the queue and get your application in. The EIDL loans, the economic injury disaster loans, based on the people I have talked to, have fallen well short of the mark in terms of what they needed and what their expectations were. Initially, it was supposed to be a $10,000 grant that would just be given, basically, not have to be paid back. And then a loan on top of that for some operating needs, which did have to be paid back. But the people I have talked to, some have gotten $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. It ended up they give about $1,000 per employee, and many have not received any funding at all. So, and in talking to local accounting firm and that kind of thing, their experience has not been good with the EIDL loans. So those appear to be problematic. Those are you apply directly to the SBA, not through the local bank, and I think that's one of the sticky wickets in this deal is the SBA is an organization who, based on the numbers I had been told last year, they had 58,000 loan applications that they processed nationwide. In the first 2 or 3 weeks of this program, there have been millions. And that's just a huge undertaking for them to try and take on. So no way they can keep up. And so that's going to take some time. But again, the ones that I have seen that have done some good have been diligent. They put in their application, they followed through, and some of them have gotten some funding. Talked to a guy the other day, and he checked on his. He was number 2,175,000 on the list. So you can imagine how long it's going to take to go through those. The other challenging aspect of all of this is they're changing the rules in the middle of the game all the time. You know, unfortunately, they slam dunk these things through. They needed to act quickly. And when they do that, there's lots of things that they didn't think about or unintended consequences. And so they're coming back out and changing things, whether it be like in the EIDL loan, well, we're going to give you $1,000 per employee instead of a flat $10,000, or the PPP loans, which some larger companies, you know, we talk about a company, they say small business and they say up to 500 employees. That's not small business out here. You know, that's a big business out here. And lots of those type of companies gobbled up lots of funds. Some of them have been kind of shamed into giving some of those funds back because they really were not in a position where they really needed it. So it's just a very fluid environment right now, and it changes virtually every day. So the main thing I would say in terms of a business out there is stay in touch with your bank. They know what's going on. Your accounting firm, they know what's going on. Call us. We can give you some updates, but particularly the banks on the PPP program, that's where you need to be talking, because they're the ones that facilitate those loans.
And I know when we talked about this right as the program launched, a lot of the banks were, trying to play catch up as well and figure out how to navigate this whole thing. Do you get the sense now that they're, fully versed and ready to roll if you go in there and try to apply or ask them a question about these?
I do. I think most banks, certainly the ones I've talked to, the local banks, they're hitting on all cylinders now. You put in an application, they get it into the system, and they typically, what I've seen, are getting back with you within a 24 to 48 hour kind of time frame on approval, disapproval. Now the funding of it's a little bit different story, but it's my understanding, once they get approval from SBA, they go ahead and fund it themselves with local funds, and then they're reimbursed by the SBA at a later date. So I think the issues that they had early on, where they were not able to get online, they weren't able to submit applications, those have pretty much been taken care of. The challenge now is there going to be enough funds to meet the needs? And I'm certain there are not.
Well, and that's, something else I know you're not necessarily in the conversations nationally, but how do you see this whole economic relief shaping up over the next, I don't know, month or 2 months?
Well, it's going to be interesting. I think I don't think we've seen the last of what the federal government plans to do. If you listen to the pundits on TV and you hear the political leaders, there's lots of back and forth as to whether they're going to help the states, if they're going to come out with additional programs for business, because I think they don't know themselves. And as you noted earlier, none of us really knows, even when we open back up, what business is going to look like. How many customers are going to come back? If the airlines open back up again, how many people are going to fly? What happens if we get a recurrence and things heat up with this virus? What do we do about that? We're just in very uncharted waters at this point in time. So it's just kind of a day at a time.
I've got a question kind of related to this that came in. By the way, if you want to submit questions, or just email them to us at thehastepostpodcast@gmail.com. Send them in. We'll try to address them. But this question specifically is about the emergency disaster declaration that Kelly said was going to continue on, I believe, until the 14th. Does that have any effect on business recovery efforts statewide?
Well, I believe, and I'm not 100% certain of this, but I believe so long as we are in a disaster area, it does make us eligible for all these loans and that type of thing, these programs that have been put in place. And that is why it was renewed, and I'm sure all states renewed it so that it makes them eligible, not only for the PPP, the EIDL, the farm programs that are coming out, the health, for the healthcare industry, there's a different program for them. There's just lots and lots of programs under this CARES Act and beyond. And I believe that we have to remain in a disaster designation in order to qualify for a lot of those.
That makes sense. And that's something that I think just in general, maybe people don't understand. When a disaster declaration is issued, that's really an effort to free up funds, right?
Right. It's for the feds to say, okay, you're in a disaster area, and that makes you eligible for all these funds that we have set aside for these programs. So that's correct.
Outside of that, I'm wondering, are there any current state options for business owners for relief? I know there was some early ones that came out, but those were tapped by very quickly, I think within a few days. Any movement there, or anything that is progressing that you know of?
There are a couple, some private and some state type programs. I know Blue Cross and Blue Shield has a program out where they're trying to provide some funds for some businesses. The one you referred to, the Hires funds, which was the hospitality industry and restaurant fund that the state put out $5 million for those organizations. And they had Network Kansas process those loan applications. In like 12 hours, they had like 1,200 applications and exceeded the available funds by quite a bit. So typical of a lot of these programs, it's a first come, first served basis. And they ended up funding a couple of local businesses were able to acquire some of those funds. Those were $15,000 loans, but they are subject to repayment. They're not grants. They're not forgivable loans. They are at a relatively low rate of interest. I believe the interest rate was 4% and a 4-year repayment term with a 4-month deferral for the first payment. So, and there's some other programs like that are out there. The Network Kansas also had a loan program that they are given tax credits by the state. The banks typically are the ones that buy these tax credits, and those banks have some funds to deploy back in their market area for loans to businesses and things. And I think we've got some of those locally. Bank of Hayes was a purchaser of some of those tax credits and perhaps has some loan funds available, but it's not a lot of money. In the case, I think it was $60,000 that they would have back that they could put out in loans. But based on exactly what you've seen, how quickly 300 billion and another 400 billion goes. The funds just don't last very long. There's plenty of need out there.
You know, and this is going to kind of task you with a personal opinion, but you know, I've seen these conversations occurring in the national media, especially in the last few days. As we keep dumping money into this, is it a good idea, or are we just digging ourselves into a hole that later we'll never get out of?
Well,
if you're comfortable sharing that opinion,
there's the $5 trillion question when this is all said and done. Absolutely, we're digging a hole. Is it money well spent? Well, that's yet to be seen. You know, obviously the federal government's spending money they don't have. Are they mortgaging our kids and our grandkids' futures? Perhaps. But on the other hand, how many businesses are we willing to allow to fail? Or, you know, what are the costs of that? So it's a tough situation. And I don't think there really are any right answers. It's much different than what we dealt with in 2008, when it was a financial meltdown of the financial system primarily. Main Street really wasn't affected that much at that point in time, partially because the federal government did act and kept credit lines open and kept those institutions going. But this is a different ballgame. This is Main Street. This touches everyone. There's really nobody unscathed in this. So, but there are those who would argue that you know, Darwinism, economic Darwinism, is what should happen, and those who have in a better position to continue and succeed are able to do so, and those who can't, you know, that the market takes care of things. I don't want to be in the position of a legislator or a congressperson or anybody trying to make these decisions, because they're really tough decisions. And unfortunately, in their haste, because this came on so quickly, clearly a lot of mistakes have been made. The unemployment situation, one thing that comes to mind. I mean, the extra $600 a week in unemployment benefits basically incentivizes people not to go back to work, because they can make more in some cases than they were making while they were working. And then you have an employer who applies for the PPP loan. He says, okay, I'm going to keep you on for the next 6 to 8 weeks since I got this loan. And the employee says, I'd really rather be on unemployment because I can make more money. But once the employer calls them back, they no longer qualify for the unemployment. So they're mad at their employer because they are making less money and having to work than they could make staying home and not working. So, you know, there are just a lot of things that have occurred that probably in hindsight don't make much sense. And that's some of the changes that Congress is making as we move along here. They're recognizing some of their mistakes and making some changes, but it absolutely is a moving target.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said this. You know, it's real easy to look back and say, we screwed that up or we screwed this up. But it's the unintended consequences, I think, that come up that, you know, you can't foresee every angle of everything you're going to do. Even the sharpest politician probably can't foresee all of it. And I don't think there's any necessarily blame to be put there. Just let's change it as we're moving forward. That's kind of what you're saying, right?
Right. I mean, some things you need to fix. If you absolutely got it wrong and you see that it's wrong, that they need to fix it. Might make some people unhappy again, but you don't roll out a 2 trillion or 3 trillion or wherever it's going to end up program and not have some mistakes made and not have some people taking advantage of the situation. You know, back in 2008, there was all the controversy about the large companies that were bailed out and then paying all their executives huge bonuses that didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And on a smaller scale, we've got some of that going on. You know, the Harvard University gets a big loan and they've got $40 billion in their endowment, you know. So you've got some situations where the guidelines were they weren't very strict on who could apply. And so lots and lots of people applied that maybe there should have been a little more of a requirement to vet whether there was that need or not. But at this point in time, they didn't have the time to do that and didn't do it. So some of that they're trying to fix now, but I'm quite confident they aren't going to get it all fixed.
I had another question come in that's kind of related to the state aspect, and it's basically, there was some rumblings about states declaring bankruptcy to get out of some of this mounting debt. Is that, you want to just talk about that? Is that an option? Is that a good idea?
Well, I don't believe now that the states have the option to declare bankruptcy. And because I know cities can, municipalities can, and we've seen it before. Detroit and I think maybe New York City at one point in time filed for bankruptcy. But the consequences of that is, okay, who's not going to get paid? Because cities and states, they sell bonds, municipal bonds for projects and that type of thing. Does that mean those people who bought those bonds to finance those roads and bridges and fire stations and that kind of thing are not going to get paid? Or what does that mean? And clearly it's also become very political in that many states, particularly the large ones, Illinois, New York, California, have significantly underfunded pension plans, retirement plans. And it's difficult to think that we should bail them out because of their mismanagement of their retirement plans and their mismanagement of their spending prior to the pandemic. So it becomes a pretty sticky wicket at some point in time as to how you do that. But I would be surprised if some states start filing bankruptcy. That would surprise me. I don't think, Kansas just a couple of years ago had its share of financial issues and has since kind of recovered, although the pension plan capers is funded at about 60% of where it's supposed to be, based on my understanding. So, what do we do about that? And so, and like we talked earlier, where does this money come from? I mean, the federal government can't just fund this stuff indefinitely without some means of paying it back.
Yeah. You mentioned projects. This is a personal question I have that I was kind of curious about your thoughts. One of the big projects here in Hayes, we've got a big road development project, the North Vine Street revitalization plan that the city commissioners did pass. I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit, just real quickly, about the way that because, well, let me back this up. The rumblings were, this is not the time now because of the situation we're in. But these are long-term development projects, and Vine Street, or the Northwest Business Corridor, I guess, would kind of fall into this as well. Should we put those projects on hold or pause, or should we continue on? Because again, it's a long-term project. This is these are road projects that'll be kind of with us for, forever, really.
Yeah, these are 30, 40, 50-year programs that will affect us for a long, long time. And I don't feel that we should let short-term conditions impact our long-term decisions. Now, the North Vine Street project, obviously controversial from day one.
Yeah, I don't want to get into whether or not that's a good idea or a bad idea.
Right, right. But I guess my answer to your question is, I don't think we should allow our current situation to dictate our prior decisions for long-term projects. The city and the county, whether it be the Northwest Business Corridor or the North Vine renovation, both have funds available to pay for those projects, or methods of which to raise funds to pay for those projects. It's not going to put either entity at significant risk if revenues drop on those particular projects. They were planned out, they're long-term projects. Yes, the North Vine came in to be more expensive than it was anticipated to be. That's unfortunate. But by the same token, They got a $6 million grant that they didn't anticipate getting when they started the project. So one could argue that it's coming in $3 million less versus $3 million more. Again, we could argue all day, and we got people on both sides that will say it's a good thing or a bad thing. But I don't think our short-term situation, whether it be the pandemic or whether it be the oil problem, because that's for us locally, that's equally or even bigger in some ways than what the pandemic is. Oil is a significant part of our economy.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the oil piece, because that's another question we had come in. Right now, the whole industry is really kind of falling apart. They're shutting down wells. How is that going to affect Ellis County and just Western Kansas in general in light of everything else that's going on with COVID-19?
Well, it's going to have an effect for certain. There's a lot of employment, a lot of revenue generated from oil activities in Ellis County. Ellis County is the #1 oil producing county in the state of Kansas. A lot of people are employed drilling wells, servicing wells, chemical companies, pipeline companies, on and on and on. And so it has a significant impact. And much of it depends on how long this is going to go on. Some of the oil situation obviously is pandemic driven. The demand for oil globally is way down. I mean, if planes aren't flying and cars aren't driving and those type of things, you don't have the demand you had. And then there's also some issues between the Saudis and the Russians as to the marketplace and how much they're willing to flood the marketplace with. So it's kind of a perfect storm for the oil industry, but it's a big deal locally, and we're going to feel some pain from it without a doubt.
Yeah, and that's something I think we talked about. I don't remember if it was the first one of these we did or the second one, but we talked about that at length, where this is the oil prices and gas prices are almost unrelated to COVID-19, right? Just happened to be right about the same time. And everybody, I think, kind of didn't really recognize what was happening until we were in the midst of pandemic. And then everybody just kind of assumed, right?
A little bit. I think the oil and gas was driven down by the Saudis and the Russians trying to gain market share or do whatever they do. And then while they're flooding the market with their product, suddenly the pandemic hits and demand for the product drops through the floor. And so the problem right now is they've got no place to put it. It's not being used up. They've only got so much storage capacity. So there's no place to go with it. So when you have no place to put it, your buyers dry up and your price basically goes to, well, what, minus $30 a barrel or some crazy thing we saw in the futures market here in the last few weeks. So yeah, they're going to shut down wells. They're going to lay off people ultimately because you can't keep paying them if there's nothing for them to do. The landowners around here who may have royalty interests, who buy automobiles and furniture and clothing and that kind of thing, are not going to have the funds that come from those royalty interests. And so it's just on and on and on. It's a really sad domino effect right now that we're going to feel some pain from for a while.
And the unemployment piece is something that I was going to ask you about. And I don't know exactly how to word the question, but basically, we have so many people that are right now unemployed for whatever reason, whether the business to be shut down or they're not seeing the business and they had to lay off or furlough folks for safety reasons. How quickly can we see the bounce back once we get back to work on the larger economy, if that makes sense? People I believe, probably more likely to spend money if they're working, which then funds other businesses. Do you see that coming back quickly, or is that going to be a long-term kind of drawn out slog of getting businesses back up to where they were 3 months ago?
I think it's going to take some time. We're a little bit fortunate here thus far in that our major employers are the university, the hospital. So we haven't seen a lot of impact in those places. Those places are still they're still paying people, I guess is where I'm going with that. But when you look at the retail, the restaurant, the hospitality sector with hotels and things that depend on travelers and those type of things, I think that's going to be a slower recovery. And I think we're looking at months for sure. I'd like to think not years, but certainly months without a doubt. I've talked to the travel plaza owners. They are proceeding forward with the travel plaza itself, the truck stop and the truck wash and the RV park. They plan to continue along with those. They're still in discussions with hotels that they're confident are going to go there, and have had some discussions with restaurants as well. Obviously, the comment to me was they want to come out and look, but they can't even come out and look right now because of the shutdown and that kind of thing. But as that opens up, they'll come out, they'll look, and again, we need not accept this as permanent. This is not a permanent condition. We've had problems before. If I look at the oil business, it's never been quite like this. But the very nature of the oil industry is boom and bust. In recent memory, you can recall $120, $130, $140 a barrel oil, and now we're at zero. And so global events, supply and demand, lots of things can change that. And so that's where I go back to those long-term projects. Those investments should be okay. I mean, I think we don't want to be driven by short-term conditions on our long-term decisions.
Yeah. I've got a friend right now. He's dumping everything into energy. He thinks now's the time to get in.
He may be exactly right. I mean, I can't imagine when it could be more depressed than it is right now. And so what's Warren Buffett says, when everybody's selling, buy, and when everybody's buying, sell. I mean, there's some truth to that.
I guess we'll see.
Yes.
I've got a question that came in, and it's centered around the economic recovery stimulus checks, the personal checks that came in. She's wanting to know how long it will take before the checks come in. I don't know if you got a chance to look at the timeline or even have that handy, but do you have an idea of when or the current status of the actual physical checks going out?
Well, obviously the direct deposits, most of those have gone out. I have talked to people who have gotten letters who had the direct deposit. And what I have read and heard from different people is that they're supposed to have them all out in the first 2 weeks in May. So if a person hasn't seen anything in the first 2 weeks in May, they probably need to be going to the IRS website. And there's a website, and you can click on it, and you can check the status of your payment. And if you haven't received something, it may tell you why, or it may tell you you need to do this or that because they don't have the proper information on file. So I would encourage anybody that is kind of watching this to go out there in the IRS website and take a look at that and see if they can find out maybe why they haven't seen it if they haven't.
Perfect. Yeah, and it's irs.gov, right?
That's right.
I suppose I could Google it right here, but I'm sitting at a computer. I'm sure if you just search IRS, you could get there. I had another question come in. This is completely unrelated to that, but I figured while we're paused there, we can get to it. Down there at Grow Haze, you guys have Brief Space, which is a co-working space. Do you think that's going to become more popular after the pandemic?
Well, it's interesting. We've had that conversation here, and we've wondered if it's going to be more popular or less popular. But I think basically part of what we do here is social distancing anyway. It's not like we've got a big crowded room here and a bunch of people in a bullpen or something. There's a lot of space. You can spread out. And so I think we could see some people who are in traditional office environments looking to branch out and look at a situation more like that. Whether the people who are operating at home that have traditionally been the ones we have attracted will feel that they're safer coming to an environment like this versus home is up for debate. But long term, I think our value proposition is we're cost-effective office space with access to lots of resources you don't have at home or maybe even in your office. So I think we'll see a little of each for a while, and then ultimately I think we'll return kind of to normal, and it'll be the typical people we've traditionally attracted.
I mean, that makes sense. You know, I feel more comfortable working from home. Although I'm in the office, I see you are as well. Nobody else is here, so I'm not stressing out too much. But also, I feel like a lot of people are ready to get out of their house, maybe whether they're dealing with kids or spouses or just the general distractions that come along. And you guys have that in your ads all the time. It's comfortable being home, but also not always conducive to working.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a more professional environment. You have access to resources you wouldn't have at home, like meeting rooms or audiovisual resources that you can use, even to do things like this. We have the resources down here to be able to do these type of things, a Zoom meeting or what have you, where you may or may not have that at home. We also believe, and we're exploring the thought process that through this pandemic, the highly populated areas where there have been problems, there may be a segment of the population that says, we've had enough of the big city, and we would like to possibly relocate to someplace a little more quiet, a little more safe. And certainly we feel we're perfectly positioned out here from the standpoint of, you would be hard pressed to go any place in the country and find a better broadband arrangement than what Ellis County has. We have good providers, we have high speed, so that's available. People are absolutely learning right now that maybe they can do a lot more things remotely than they thought they could because they've had to. And so we're trying to get our arms around about how we get the message out to a segment to the population that, hey, this might be a really good place to live. I can work remotely. I've got access to all the resources I need, whether it's high-speed broadband or a facility like BriefSpace, and all the other quality of life things we talk about that they may or may not have bought into before, but we don't have to get in the subway to go to work with a bazillion other people that are spreading a virus around and that kind of thing. I mean, we're, as I've heard many people say, we social distance by the very nature of where we live and what we do. And so that's not to say we're invulnerable from this thing, but we are certainly less vulnerable than they are in some places.
Yeah. I don't know why people wouldn't want to live here. It's the only place I want to live.
Well, there you go.
It's beautiful. And if you're living in someplace like Denver, for example, living here is considerably cheaper.
Yes. Even though we go back and forth with people on the cost of housing and that type of thing in Hays and Ellis County, compared to many places, we're way less. And we're still working on that. We're still proceeding with our workforce housing project. Just as we will be in front of the city commission, or at least our proposal will be the ordinance in a couple weeks to approve that project and move it to the next stages, which are the notice stages for public hearing, as well as for any objections that the county or the school district may have to it. And so we're still looking at late summer, getting that finalized and proceeding forward, unless we find out that things have changed considerably. But at this point in time, another long-term project that we choose not to let our short-term situation dictate our long-term strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. People still need a place to live, whether there's well, and we talked too that this will, or it maybe has the potential to not only open up more housing, but bring down that particular segment of workforce housing cost, right?
Yeah, we're hitting a niche there that is not very well served right now. There's not much inventory in that niche, and I believe we'll hit that, and it'll be it'll be popular. I tell you, I talk to realtors all the time, and this market is really strong right now. It amazes me, but there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of houses selling right now, and you wouldn't think that. So perhaps we're, haven't felt the crunch yet of this whole thing with some of the unemployment and some of the oil issues and that kind of thing. But at the moment, the real estate market is still quite strong.
That's interesting to me. Do you have any idea why that might be?
Well, a couple different things. One is, as I talked earlier, I mean, when your major employers are the university and the hospital and the school district, and those people they still have jobs, they're still getting paid. That hasn't changed. Spring is always the strong time of year for the real estate market, so you've got that going on. And I think it's just indicative of the level of demand we have here for housing. They're just we're fortunate, and we have a robust housing market. And thus far, this situation has not had a huge negative impact on it. Knock on wood, because we still may have some tougher days ahead. But at this point in time, the market's really strong.
That's some good news. I want to start wrapping this up. I want to give anybody an opportunity to watch, or that is watching, to send us another question. The Hayes Post Podcast at gmail.com. We'll be on for a few more minutes. You can get it in there now. But while we're waiting for that, I'm wondering, do you want to share where people might be able to get more information about either economic recovery or current state or federal programs that they can access to, where to go, that just to find out more?
Well, I think certainly the SBA website is a good source for all of that information. They outline their programs. I believe it's sba.gov. They outline their programs, both the PPP and the EIDL. They have their applications online that you can download and fill out. And then in the case of the PPP program, take to the bank. And in the case of the SBA EIDL program, you just apply directly online to them. So that's one site. You can look at our site. You can look at the chamber site, our Facebook page. We try and put out there anything that comes across our radar. There's a program out there I looked at earlier today called the Main Street Loan Program, which SBA has. I find it interesting. They were bragging because they reduced their minimum loan amount from $1 million to $500,000. And they call it the Main Street Loan Program. And I just don't know that many Main Street businesses that would be borrowing that much money, but there are some, and that is a program that's available. And again, you can read about it on the SBA website. So we're trying to put anything that comes across into our radar on our website and on our Facebook page, primarily our Facebook page. And so those would be the sites I would go to and keep an eye on. The Hayes Chamber, the Downtown Hayes Development Corporation all put current information out there about kind of what's going on.
Fantastic. Well, Doug, I don't think we have any more questions that have come in. Just double checking here. So I think it will wrap up here. Is there anything else you want to add before we go?
Well, the only thing I'd say is that we're resilient out here. We've gone through difficult times before, and this will pass. It is unprecedented in many ways. We've never seen anything quite like this, but we'll recover from it. I think people need to keep the right attitude and hang in there as best they can. If they have specific issues and need some help, I don't always know that we can absolutely, we can't write somebody a check, but we are here to try and help any way we can, steer them in the right direction. So I'd encourage anybody to call us or call the chamber or call the Downtown Hayes Development Corporation. That's our purpose, is to try and help business. And so I would encourage anybody to do so. And I think things are going to get better. I really do.
I love it. Ended on a positive note.
There you go.
Thank you so much for taking the time, Doug. And thank you for everybody that's watching us live here. We will have this available for replay if you want to watch it again or share it out. as soon as we can get it up, probably within an hour or so, it'll be up available for replay. And Doug, thanks again. Well, I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed it as always. And call us if you've got any questions.
Perfect.